Do you know who you are? Like, yeah, you have your name, you have your social standing, you have your family, you have your friends, but do you actually know yourself? Are you sure that those things, like your job, your education, things like that, actually describe you for who you are? Are you sure of that? Have you ever attempted to debate with yourself whether that is actually how you would like to define yourself? And in general, what is the definition of the self? Why do you define yourself? Where do you get that definition from? How do you know that that is you? How can you be sure that those things that you define yourself by are actually you? Do you know who you are at the core? Do you know who you are when you're staying true to yourself and not just going along with whatever society prescribes to you? Well, hi there again, my darling humanoids, androids, reptiloids, asteroids, or whatever way you identify yourself, especially relevant for this topic. So, I'm here again to speak to you about a particularly interesting subject, which I have essentially been studying for the past 12 years or so. For those of you who are into astrology, you'll get that I've been doing that because essentially Pluto is in my first house in Sagittarius. So if you know, you know. If you don't know, then this information is irrelevant to you. All that you need to know is that I've been diving deeper into the topic of self-definition and how we actually understand ourselves and what we choose to define ourselves by. And of course, I'm not a know it all. However, I have looked a lot into philosophy, psychology, psychoanalysis, and especially the teachings that I found helpful have been from Professor Carl Jung, who was a student of Freud's. And the problem is that the teachings that he proposed get slightly messed up by New Age spirituality movements as well, which I happen to be quite involved into as well, along with the self-development community and all of those other New Age, just trying to be a better person and survive on this planet communities, essentially. But so to make this topic as easy to discuss as possible, I'm just gonna bring up this chart in here straight away. Of course, there are many different charts that people have created over the years trying to visually describe the concepts that Freud and Carl Jung have essentially proposed to the definition of the self. But the thing is, the most common one that I found out there was the image of the iceberg. However, I don't think that it depicts all of the dynamics between the different types of self properly. So I kind of created my own chart. So let's dive in. So first of all, of course, before Freud as well, there have been many people attempting to describe what is a self. It just so happens that Freud is a super duper famous guy who was also a white man. And his concept just happens to be the one that is the most commonly spread and gets misused a lot in the modern spiritual and self-development communities. Hence, I wanted to take that for the base in particular. So, in his proposition, essentially the self breaks down into three main components. In the iceberg analogy, they are slightly shown in a different way. However, essentially the three components are the id, which is the it, which is essentially the animal aspect. So us humans, being animals, we're just biological creatures, and all of the instincts, all of the intuition, all of the natural drives that come from us being biological creatures, biological animals, is essentially what the id is. Then we have the ego, which is the I, which is not only is it self-definition, which is the way that some people sometimes describe it, but it is also the definition in terms of how the people around us describe us. And then we have the superego, which is essentially the higher self that so much of the spiritual community really distills and makes unclear as to what the higher self is, giving it all sorts of contexts where in reality, what is the superego? The superego is essentially the best self that you can be. So it is composed of you being in your ideals, you standing in your value, you acting according to your value, and you reaching for the highest potential that you and at first society, before you detach from it, can aspire to or imagines for yourself. So those are the three main components. And so in between the superego and the id is pretty much where we find the actual ego, the I, because unfortunately, as hard as we might try, and sometimes we can even reach the state of being in the superego, but we can't hold on to it forever unless we really smartly redefine it to fit into our ego, which I will talk about perhaps later, but it doesn't matter. So the superego is in essence the unachievable ideal, whereas the id is what we are at a biological level with the imperfections and all. And so the us, that is the us, the I, is in between the two, between the absolute perfection that is detached from any animal needs or any animal definitions, any animal tendencies that strive to just get and consume and survive, and the actual things that make us want to just get, consume, survive, and don't care about all of those hypothetical knowledge-based values and self-improvements and things like that. Like the id just literally wants to live well and not have any enemies attacking it. And so that was a cool concept, but Jung, being Carl Jung, was like, I disagree, because he disagreed with everything by Freud. Well, okay, not everything, but he took some concepts that Freud had proposed and modified them or stated that they were inaccurate in one way or shape. So the thing that Carl Jung essentially brought into this theory is that he also had started to speak about the self in terms of the conscious self and the unconscious self. In other words, known as the light and the shadow self. Whereas the light is the conscious self, the things that you're aware of, the things that you have control over, and the unconscious self, otherwise known as the shadow self, which is essentially anything that is in our unconscious that we do not directly control unless we confront it, which is called confronting the shadow, especially a popular term in the modern spiritual community once again, which is essentially the process of bringing all of those things that are in your unconscious, in your shadow, to the light side and becoming conscious of them. But as conscious as you might try to be, there will pretty much always be things that you're still unconscious of or don't realize that you're doing. So I'm not going to say that it's a futile experience to try to bring absolutely everything out from the shadow, but it is essentially just a part of our lifelong journey as human beings. Is as soon as we bring something into the light, something new appears in the shadow, and it's this endless process of yin and yang, the light and the shadow. You know how it goes, the whole duality thing. And along with the topics of the conscious and the unconscious, Carl Jung also proposed the slightly controversial idea of the collective consciousness and unconsciousness, where he believed that there is a collective of beings, which I, from my own thoughts and my own debates in my own mind and with other people, I kind of agree with, is that essentially, what is a collective? Let's first define that. A collective is pretty much a group that is defined by something that they share in common. So it can go from as wide a range of the Earth collective, which is pretty much anything that is defined by living on Earth, to just a collective of somebody called by a surname, which would be like your father's side in your family. That is also a collective. The collective of dolphins, that would be just all of the dolphins that are defined as being dolphins, or the collectives of humanoids or reptiloids or androids that I refer to in every intro. And so the collective consciousness is basically the amalgamation of all of the conscious experiences, all of the conscious thoughts that a certain collective has. It's a collection of all of the beliefs and values that those people with that shared definition hold and possess. All of the things that they are mindful of, that they actually pay attention to. That is the collective consciousness. And then the collective unconscious is the shadow of those things. So all of the things that that particular collective does not pay attention to, does not realize, is not mindful of, or just doesn't take into consideration when making any sorts of decisions. And so now let's get into the fun part of the actual self-definition. How do you define yourself, where that came from, so on and so forth. So as I've spoken about, you have your superego, and then there's the collective consciousness. So essentially what happens, right, is that when you're born into the collective of humanity, And typically you're born into the collective of a certain family system. You're born into the collective of a certain country. So we can kind of imagine this as a Russian doll, whereas there's you, that is in the collective of your family, and the collective of your family is within the collective of your city, that is in the collective of your country, that is in the collective of your continent, that is in the collective of human race, that is in the collective of biological creatures on Earth, and that is in the collective of Earth itself. So there's different levels of collectives that all have an influence on who you are. But essentially, when you are a child, when you're just born, being raised, going to school, going to university, most of the time, what forms your superego, so your ideals, standards, aspirations, and values, are all of those collectives, but mainly your family systems, your educational systems, and perhaps your city, your country, your nation, and whatever place of belonging that you identify yourself with. But you're especially, if you are following the path of standard education, you're especially influenced by the educational system and the government system as well. So in that sense, your superego, when you're growing up, and as long as you're following kind of that standard life path, is pretty much fully formed and fully informed by the superego of the collectives that you exist within. So what you value, what you think is perfection, what you think is the optimal lifestyle, what you aspire to, what you think you would be if you were perfect, is whatever that society, that collective that you belong to tells you is perfect. So let's say you live somewhere in the West, let's say you live, I don't know, in the UK, you study in a standard school, and you come from a family of doctors and nurses. Then your superego would most likely be that you have finished education perfectly, graduated with perfect scores, all of the levels of education for a doctorate degree or whatever it is called of medical school. You become a neurosurgeon, and then you make millions doing surgeries on brains or something like that, and you write a bunch of papers and you become world famous. And that would be your superego, your ideal, that you would most likely be informing your ego and therefore your actions and your self-definition by. But then if we get to your id, or your shadow side, essentially, it would be the part of you that doesn't really want to study, the part of you that doesn't really want to follow education at all, actually, that just kind of wants to stay home, eat and reproduce, or if not stay home, go to uni, but kind of party and once again just get with people, hang out, have fun, adventure, and consume as much as possible, just live in the moment, do get the most from life that you can right then and there. It doesn't care for whatever your parents, whatever society wants you to be. It doesn't care what even you might want to be in the future. It doesn't care for your future prospects. It just wants to maximize what you can get out from right now, right here, and be the most safe and have the easiest life that it possibly can in the now. And then the collective unconscious in this particular example would be the part of society that doesn't actually care for all of those high ideals and aspirations in general that people have made up. The collective unconscious, in this sense, is the part of, for example, your country, the part of the society that you were brought up in, that also just wants to survive, that doesn't really care for what education you have. It only cares for what you can bring as a human being to the tribe as a maximum. Or another example of the collective shadow in this particular case could be that where in the collective consciousness, you becoming a surgeon would be like, wow, he's really doing this to save people, he's doing this to do good by society, so on and so forth. Whereas the collective shadow here would be the fact that, oh, it's just a very convenient person to fit exactly into the system in the way that we need him to fit, with particularly the education that we have created over the years, and that we don't have to worry about messing something up because he has been educated, and particularly the way that we say he has to be educated. And so it's an easy way for the government to make money, for all of the systems that have raised you to profit from you working in the job that you end up working in, and just not overcomplicating things and not making anybody think too much about you. But now let's get back to you. So once again, to reiterate, you right now is the id that you have, is just a young person who's just forced into an educational system, who in reality just wants to sleep, eat, reproduce, party, enjoy their time, right? Then your superego, in this particular case, is an aspiring neurosurgeon, a really, really good top grade student who's spending all of their time studying and working and trying to get internships, and also maybe writing something on the side, preparing to create scientific papers and scientific journals, who's always talking to different medical professionals, who's really going to make an impact on the medical field and save all of society. That is the superego. And so between these two is your ego, above which is the persona. So the ego that you have is the you that is just trying to balance the id and the superego in the best way you possibly can. So it is you sitting in your room stressing about the amount of coursework that you have to do, how many times you have to call your parents in order to make them happy or something along those lines, while at the same time still having time to relax and maybe have at least a tiny bit of a social life, and also have time to somehow eat extremely unnutritious food and so on and so forth. And then the persona that is built on top of that ego is just that you're yet just another medical school student who is just doing their best to survive in the system and is trying to make their parents happy. And that is the persona that you have. So essentially the persona is the mask that you wear in order to please the collective overconscious or the collective consciousness, the societal expectations that you were born into. And so that is your life just for now. But let's say you have embarked on the path of individuation. Or in other words, perhaps you have awakened or are coming close to an awakening. So once again, let's carry on with this example. What would be going on, right? So first of all, if you are, let's say, female, because you can see that I have written this term called anima and animus, which are the shadow sides within both men and women. Whereas for women, the animus is the unconscious masculine within a woman, that a woman has to go through a process of embracing and integrating within herself. And the anima is the unconscious woman inside of a man. So it's all the feminine aspects and features within a man, such as being nurturing, being caring for others, being empathetic. And the animus is instead the striving, the wanting to achieve, the warrior kind of persona within the female unconscious. But so you're living this life of a medical student, and let's say you are a woman. So as a woman, being a med student, what do you have to do? You have to work a lot. You have to battle pretty much against all of the men in the field, all of these doctors and scientists that are telling you that, oh, you're just a girl, it's okay, girls are a bit dumb anyways. Most of the best inventions and most of the most famous surgeons or whatever could be men. I don't know, I'm not a surgeon, so don't correct me because I know I'm wrong for a fact, but let's just say for an example, that you get all of this male oppression around you, or it might actually be self-implied, which most times, let me open a little secret for you. Most times there is not actually that much pressure from society on you to win or something. It's all internal. So if you feel like there's men or women oppressing you for some cause, for some reason, they're actually most likely not. You're just interpreting it that way. And that was a massive eye-opener for me. But that is another topic for another video. But anyway. So you start working non-stop, you forget to eat sometimes, you fully begin to abandon your id in order to achieve your superego. Because in a funny way, when you're trying to abandon your id, your unconscious drives for partying and relaxation, that is where your animus kind of flares up and gets mad and starts just trying to bang out, trying to angrily achieve everything, win over all of the men, strive for the best they can achieve, and you essentially become driven by the animus more and more. the more you try to repress your unconscious desires, the more those unconscious desires start actually controlling you and slowly directing and manipulating your persona and overtaking your persona. And if, let's say, instead you're a man, it could be that everybody is expecting you to be striving and achieving, and you also, let's say, have a girlfriend who's expecting you to be a gentleman, and everybody is expecting you to also earn at the same time and be a provider, while you are still a literal student. You're literally just a child. Like, yeah, you might be over 18, but you're still very, very young, and everybody is already expecting you to get a house, get a car, so on and so forth. And the anima in this case could start overtaking you, in the sense of you expecting to be getting all of these rewards from you just following the actions that you're expected to follow. So you start thinking that, okay, if I take care of this and this and that, and I think about this and this and that, and really, really multitask, then I'm going to be able to receive all of these things, all of these goodies that I'm promised to receive. So you essentially become very demanding. And then in your unconscious, the longer you go without getting all of the rewards and receiving all of the awards that you're expecting from caring so much for so many people, the more and more emotions will start piling up within you that you, of course, being a male in a modern society or in general in a human society, would be expected to repress. Therefore, you wouldn't be expressing them. And what is the outcome of that? Burning out, or a full-on psychosis, or something along those lines. And once again, returning to the female example, you're striving for all of these things, taking all of these actions, start abandoning all of your social groups, start abandoning all of your basic human needs. And what is happening in the shadows in that time? In the shadows, your unconscious self is getting more and more mad for how little care you show to it, for how little you actually prioritize yourself. And so while you're very, very quickly trying to progress through education and become the best that you can be, that also leads you to a state of burnout, where your body just says no, because the id is, once again, our physical human body, and it has its limits. You can't keep increasing cortisol levels to an infinite amount. Eventually, it is going to break down. So, whichever gender you are, you keep striving for the superego, and then eventually you come to a breaking point. You come to burnout. Then after a burnout, what will likely happen is that you get support from those around you to just go back, get back on the grind, get over it, get over yourself. Don't feel into your feelings. What are you even doing? What do you mean you need a break? What do you mean you're not sure that this is what you want to pursue? What do you mean that if this is your lifestyle now, you can't even imagine how bad it's going to be in the future? No, just get back to it. We want you to be a doctor. So once again, that would be the collective shadow coming through the collective consciousness being like, no, we need you to become a doctor. And the collective shadow part would be that we don't care actually how well you're doing. We need you to play this persona, this role, this archetype in our society, in our collective, and otherwise we won't like it. But if you're not under enough influence or don't obey full-on command of that collective, then what might happen is the so well-known term ego death. So what is the death of the ego? I have kind of spoken about it in one of my previous videos, but I don't think I've put it down well enough back then. But essentially, the ego death is the process where first you realize that the superego that you have built up is not actually yours. You start realizing and facing the fact that the superego that you have is not yours. It's not what you want. It's what the collective and the society wants from you. It is what your parents want. It is what whoever brought you up wants. It is whatever the education system told you should want. But isn't necessarily you, that you want it. Because in all of that time that you have been pursuing that superego, that old image, that old ideal, those old values, guess what? Your own values as you went through that journey have likely changed. You have faced situations, you have potentially faced some trauma even. You have seen things, you found out about how the people that actually live up to that standard, what their lives actually are behind the shadows, behind the curtains. And you might have realized that that is not actually the way that you want your life to go. And also, potentially, time has passed since you were born. In that time that you have grown up, so many things in life, so many things in our reality, in our collective society might have changed and advanced, that superego just simply does not work. It just stopped being relevant in that time. And so the persona that you have built up around your ego, around yourself, in order to show that, oh yeah, I'm striving for this superego, starts breaking down. Because when those ideals are not your ideals anymore, when those values that you were told you should have are not actually your values and you become conscious of it, you slowly realize that actually that persona that you have built up is totally fake to you. It's not inherent to you. Well, it is inherent in the sense that it was given to you by your parents or by your society, but it is not authentic to you. In all of that time that you have spent trying to play that persona, you have built up a whole new set of values, a whole new set of ideas that have become your authentic self, that have become your heart in that time. And that mask that you're wearing is not in accordance to those values or ideals any longer. And so you decide to get rid of that persona and you decide to embark on the journey of living authentically. Oh, how amazing. How good for you. Good on you. You don't know what you're getting into. Or maybe you do. After this video, hopefully you kind of do. Because essentially, if you're lucky enough, when you disown that persona, if you have a very, very nice and supportive family system or whatever, they'll just be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. Take the time to find yourself. Take the time to explore the world. You're a free human being. You can do what you want. But the thing is, in most cases, come on, let's be real, that is not what happens. When you tell people that you do not associate with that persona that they have expected of you any longer, they start judging you. They get mad. They get mad because they already built up so many expectations and so many stories and ideas around who you will be once you achieve your superego, which is unachievable either way. And even if you do have a supportive system around you who are going to be there for you, whatever your decisions are in life, thing is, once you start shifting your persona and disowning your old persona and embarking on the journey of finding yourself, either way your tastes are going to change, and whatever you enjoyed in your past life, so before your ego and your persona got shattered, you're not necessarily going to enjoy them anymore. Those are not necessarily going to be the things that you're interested in anymore. And as you slowly go through this journey of trying to find your new persona, trying to build up a new ego, parts of your old persona and the things and the people that you associated it with will begin to fall away. You will start to lose people from your life. You will start to lose social circles, social belonging, because over time you will realize that you don't actually have anything to talk about with those people. And any reasons that you might have to hang out just slowly start getting stripped away. And as you go through this process of stripping away your old persona and trying to find your new persona, because there starts to be a disconnect between the old superego and the new one that you have to build up in order to find your new persona. Because in order to build that bridge between the id and the superego, there has to be a defined superego in the first place, or it's going to be defined for you, which is what you're born with, essentially, is defined by somebody else superego for you. But if you really want to live authentically, what you essentially have to do is go through a process of coming up with a new superego that will be bridged by your ego to your id. And while you don't have that new built up and shaped and formed superego, you don't have the built up and shaped and formed new persona, you lose your ego and you're essentially stripped down to just being at your id. And because the famous saying that the only way from down is up, that is essentially the best path forward either way, is that you get down to the very, very core. You face your shadow. Another very famous in the spiritual community term is facing your shadow, whereas essentially you come to grips and you face what your id is. You're stripped down to just you being a biological creature called Homo sapiens that has particular needs. And what are those needs? Those needs are food, shelter, water, air, procreation, and then as we go up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's all of the other stuff like social belonging, speaking to people, feeling loved and cared for, having somebody to love, then having something to do, having motivation to do it, and then blah, 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 to self-actualization. And so essentially you start going through this process of raising yourself up on this hierarchy of needs. So pretty much before you killed your ego, you were somewhere on this hierarchy, then you killed your ego, you went all the way down because you have shaved yourself from all of the things that you used to define yourself with, that used to fill out all of those steps, to just the bare minimum. And then you start thinking of ways that you can satisfy the bare minimum in a way that is aligned with you as you are now, that you have already had all of that life experience, because while you had all of that previous life experiences with your old ego, you have come out with particular characteristics of your physical body, with particular manners of speaking and communicating with people. You have gained certain talents and traits. And because we exist in capitalism, essentially, if you just try to satisfy your need for food or shelter, yeah, you can't just go and beg people for food, and you can't just run away into a forest. That is also a potential path that you might end up following, which is living the natural life of grid, stuff like that, and just collecting the food that the way that us as Homo sapiens, ancient people, like the tribal people used to do. But chances are, if you still want to stay connected with your family or keep some sort of friends in a modern society and not fully go back or go off to the off-grid life, you will realize that actually you kind of need to remember what talents you have actually built up in the capitalist system and what skills you have that will lead you to getting money in order to afford the food and the shelter that your biological creature self needs and desires. And so that starts taking you up the hierarchy of needs, where at first you start thinking, okay, so how can I get food and shelter? Yeah, so it's to make money. How do I make money? Oh, it's through doing this and that. So I have these skills. I can do this, that. My name is this, that. I have this passport, so on and so forth. And then trying to kind of take those building blocks and bring them together into some formation that will be the groundwork, that will be the base of your new persona that you then start developing on top of. So the only way that you can go forward from there is to build up a new superego through, once again, trying to find yourself, going through even more challenges, even more things, until you find a way to manage your stress, until you find things that actually make you happy, that actually can satisfy your needs, that are actually aligned with you. And by alignment, I mean provide you with the needs that you have in the way that you need them to be provided, which is most likely as little stress as possible, as peaceful as possible, as balanced as possible, as joyful as possible, and causing as little problems and as little dismay to the people around you and yourself as possible. And that is going to be your new superego, which is just this most optimal way to just live and enjoy yourself on this planet. And you start building yourself up to achieve and define that superego better and better, because you won't know straight away what the new superego is going to be. You might have a conception of what you think it could be, but as you go through all of these life journeys, all of these experiences, as you discover yourself, you'll find out more and more of what actually is just a romanticized image that you have created in your head and what is actually a thing that you want. And so yeah, that is essentially the individuation journey when it's kind of grounded down to normal terms and not explained by some Swiss people in very, very fancy psychoanalytic terminology. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this made some sense, and I hope this is helpful to you understanding what the actual individuation process looks like, what the ego death is, and how to get out of it, and how essentially, if you found this video, you will most likely spend the next half year to a year to multiple years. So good luck with this process. And if you haven't embarked on it, honestly do embark on it. It's really fun. It's like really fun. Yeah, it's been difficult, as you might have noticed, but honestly, in the place that I'm at now, I'm literally in Turkey. Like, with my old ego, I would not get out of the UK. I would be still grinding, depressed and stressed and anxious on some crappy project. But because I have done so much work on myself, and I know what I like, and I like holidays, and I like warm weather, I am now in Turkey. Just sorry. And yeah, find yourself. I believe in you. You can do it. I know that if you just look within yourself, you'll know that you're just a biological creature, and then just basically pile up all of the talents that you have, pile up all of the things that you think you like, and just go and do them. And try to make your life all about just doing what you enjoy and what you actually like and what actually brings you happiness. Stop trying to force yourself to like. Live well. And that's it.